I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. Jessica's laughter, rich, uninhibited, musical, floated through our apartment. It wasn't her polite social laugh or even her genuine amusement chuckle. This was different. Intimate. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. "You're terrible," she said, her voice dropping to a hushed, honeyed tone that made my stomach tighten. "We can't keep talking like this." I stood perfectly still, barely breathing. 3 years together, engaged for 8 months, wedding just 3 months away, and suddenly I felt like an intruder in my own home. Jessica's voice dropped even lower. "I know, I missed that too." The plastic bag from the hardware store crinkled in my grip. I'd left work early to fix the leaking kitchen faucet, a surprise for Jessica who had been complaining about it for weeks. Now I was the one surprised. I cleared my throat and stepped into the living room. Jessica whirled around, her face flickering through expressions. Shock, guilt, composure, so quickly I might have imagined it. "Nick, you're home early," she said, ending the call without saying goodbye. Her smile looked painted on. "I was just talking to Sarah about the Johnson project. You know how she gets with those deadline jokes." Sarah. Her colleague. The one who'd sent us a congratulatory flower arrangement when I'd been promoted to lead architect last month. The same promotion that meant I could finally afford the wedding Jessica had always wanted. "How's the project going?" I asked, setting down my bag of tools. "Oh, you know. The usual madness." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "What are you doing home so early? I thought you had meetings all afternoon." "Cancelled. Thought I'd fix that faucet that's been driving you crazy." I smiled, but something felt wrong. A subtle shift in the atmosphere between us. "My hero," she said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "I'll make some coffee while you work." I nodded, studying her face. Was I imagining things? Being paranoid? Jessica looked the same as always, beautiful, put together, with those expressive blue eyes that had captivated me from our first meeting at a mutual friend's gallery opening. The next day, I was elbow-deep in the sink cabinet, my hands covered in rust and grime from the ancient pipe fittings, when Jessica's phone buzzed on the counter. I wouldn't have looked, I'm not that guy, but the screen lit up right in my line of sight. "Brad," with a text preview, "can't stop thinking about last night." Brad. Her ex-boyfriend from college. The one she described as fun but toxic. The one she claimed to have no contact with anymore. I stared at the screen until it went dark, my heart pounding. The wrench in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. When the phone buzzed again, something inside me snapped. I wiped my filthy hands on a rag and picked it up. Jessica hadn't changed her password since she'd shown it to me months ago, her mother's birthday, and the phone unlocked with 4 quick taps. The messages loaded, hundreds of them stretching back months. My eyes caught fragments as I scrolled. "After the wedding we can finally..." "He doesn't suspect anything. Just a few more months of playing house. You're my real future, not him." Each word hit like a physical blow. Plans for their new life together. Inside jokes at my expense. Photos I couldn't unsee. "Nick is a safe choice, but you're my real love. Once we're married, divorce will be easy. Half of everything is mine by law." I felt sick, my vision tunneling. This couldn't be real. Not Jessica. Not the woman I'd built my life around, the one I'd planned everything for. Our home, our future children, our retirement. All of it just a calculation? The sound of keys in the front door jerked me back to the present. I looked up to see Jessica standing in the kitchen doorway, grocery bags in her arms, her face draining of color as she registered the phone in my hand and the expression on my face. The bags slipped from her grasp, oranges and apples tumbling across the tile floor, a carton of eggs shattering. Neither of us moved to clean up the mess. "Nick," she started, her voice steady despite the panic in her eyes. "I can explain." But the text explained everything. The late-night work calls. The mysterious weekend conferences. The sudden interest in joint bank accounts. The insistence that we didn't need a prenuptial agreement because it's not romantic. I'd been so blind, so stupid, so in love. "Who's Brad?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm even as my world collapsed around me. "Who's Brad?" I repeated, my voice eerily calm despite the earthquake rumbling through my chest. Jessica's expression hardened, switching from panic to outrage so quickly it gave me whiplash. She stepped over the spilled groceries, eggs dripping between the tiles, and thrust her hand out. "Give me my phone. Now." I didn't move. "You didn't answer my question." "How dare you?" she hissed, color returning to her cheeks in angry splotches. "How dare you go through my private messages? That's a complete violation of trust, Nick." The absurdity of her statement hit me like a bucket of ice water. I almost laughed. A violation of trust? I scrolled through her phone, finding a particularly damning message. Like this one? Nick is such a workaholic, he doesn't even notice when I'm gone all weekend. At least he's good for the mortgage. Jessica lunged for the phone, but I held it out of reach. Or this one, I continued, my voice growing tighter. After the wedding, we'll have to wait at least a year before I file for divorce. His family has money too. I want to make sure I get everything I'm entitled to. You're taking everything out of context, she snapped, giving up on grabbing the phone and crossing her arms defensively. Brad is just a friend. You're being paranoid and controlling right now. I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I thought I'd been living with for 3 years. This stranger in front of me looked the same, but something fundamental had changed, or perhaps had always been different than I'd believed. A friend who you're planning a future with while engaged to me? I scrolled to another message and read aloud, I can't wait to wake up next to you every morning instead of him. Her strategy shifted in an instant. The anger dissolved, replaced by a wounded expression. Tears welled in her eyes, perfectly timed. Okay, yes, I've been talking to Brad. We reconnected a few months ago and it's been confusing. She wiped at a tear that tracked down her cheek. But it's just words, Nick. I've been having doubts, feeling trapped. You're always so focused on your career, on our perfect future, that you never asked if it's what I really wanted. So your solution was to plan to marry me, divorce me, and take half my assets rather than having an honest conversation? Her eyes flashed with something cold before she composed herself. You're twisting everything, she whispered. This isn't the real me. I've been lost, confused. We can fix this, go to counseling. I'll cut contact with Brad. He doesn't mean anything. I read another message. Nick is the stable choice, but you're my real love. Always have been. Jessica's tactics changed again. She straightened her spine, chin lifting. Fine. You want the truth? I've been bored out of my mind, Nick. Do you know how dull you've become? All you talk about is work, our future house, our retirement plans. You're 32 going on 60. Her laugh was brittle. At least Brad knows how to live in the moment. Each word was precision engineered to hurt, to knock me off balance. I felt the intended sting but also a strange clarity. This was who she really was. This calculated cruelty had always lurked beneath the surface. I'm going to a hotel, I said quietly, pocketing her phone. I need to think. Fine, run away, she spat. That's what you do best. Avoid difficult emotions. I packed a small bag while she followed me through the apartment, her approach shifting between threats and tearful pleas with dizzying speed. If you leave now, we're done, she warned, then moments later, please, Nick, I'm begging you. We can work through this. People make mistakes. I closed my suitcase, oddly calm in the eye of the hurricane. This wasn't a mistake, Jessica. It was a plan. A long-term, calculated plan to use me. That's not true. I love you. I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered how I'd missed so much. No, you don't. You never did. The hotel room was sterile and impersonal, but it gave me space to breathe, to think. My phone buzzed relentlessly with Jessica's messages, swinging wildly between vicious accusations and desperate apologies. You've ruined everything with your paranoia. I'm sorry, I was confused, please come home. You'll regret this, Nick. You're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you. I need you. I'm falling apart without you. Around 3 a.m, staring at the popcorn ceiling, I made a decision. I would go back, not because I believed her manipulations but because I needed to understand how deep this deception went. Something told me I'd only scratched the surface of Jessica's betrayal. I texted her back, we need to talk. I'll come home tomorrow. Maybe we can work through this. Her reply came instantly, thank you, baby. I knew you'd understand. I love you so much. I set down the phone, feeling strangely detached. I didn't recognize my life anymore, but one thing was certain. I needed the full truth before I could walk away. And to get it, I'd have to pretend I was falling for her manipulations. The game she'd been playing all along. I returned home the next evening, steeling myself as I turned the key in our front door. The apartment smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. Jessica had been baking, something she only did when she wanted to create an impression of domestic bliss. Nick? She rushed toward me, perfectly made up despite the casual apron and flour-dusted hands. I'm so glad you're home. She tried to embrace me but I sidestepped, pretending to set down my bag. We need to talk before anything else. Of course, she said, her smile faltering slightly. But I made your favorite apple crumble. Maybe we could talk over dessert. I nodded, playing along. Sure. That sounds nice. Over the next few days, Jessica was the picture of the perfect fiancée, attentive, affectionate, constantly touching me and seeking reassurance. Each gesture felt calculated, each loving word rehearsed. I responded with just enough warmth to keep her believing I was falling for it. I've cut all contact with Brad, she announced over breakfast on the third day. I blocked his number, deleted all messages. It was a mistake, a stupid, confused period that didn't mean anything. I smiled weakly. I appreciate that. When she left for work, my real investigation began. I'd taken a week of personal leave, telling my boss I needed time to finalize wedding plans. Instead, I methodically combed through every inch of our shared life. In the back of her closet, beneath a stack of winter sweaters, I found a small lockbox. The key was hidden in an old jewelry case, exactly where I expected. Jessica wasn't as clever as she thought. Inside were bank statements for an account I'd never seen before, with regular transfers dating back 18 months. Small amounts, never enough to notice from our joint accounts, but they added up to nearly $30,000. On her laptop, I discovered an email account I didn't recognize, jessicanewlife@gmail.com. The password wasn't her mother's birthday this time, but after a few attempts I guessed correctly, Brad and Jess 2023. The inbox was filled with correspondence between them, planning in explicit detail how they would bleed me dry. He's getting that promotion next month, one email read. Once that happens, we push for the wedding date. The sooner we're married, the sooner we can execute the exit plan. Another contained a detailed timeline. Month 1 of marriage, suggest combining all assets and accounts. Month 3, begin documenting emotional neglect for leverage. Month 6, suggest buying investment property together. Month 9, begin transferring assets. Month 12, file for divorce claiming irreconcilable differences. The most damning discovery came when I found a folder of legal documents hidden in a false bottom of her desk drawer, preliminary divorce paperwork already filled out, waiting only for a date and signature. There was also a consultation receipt from a divorce attorney specializing in high-asset splits. I photographed everything, created digital copies, secured the evidence in a cloud account she couldn't access. Still, I needed more. I needed to understand how long this had been her plan. Had anything been real? I called Amanda, Jessica's best friend since college. She was surprised to hear from me directly. Jessica usually controlled our social calendar. Can we meet for coffee? Without Jessica knowing? I asked. It's important. Amanda hesitated. I don't know, Nick. Jess is my best friend. It's about our future. Please. We met at a cafe across town. Amanda sat nervously, stirring her latte without drinking it. What's this about, Nick? Is everything okay with the wedding? I decided to be direct. I know about Brad. Her expression gave her away immediately, wide eyes, then quickly looking down. She knew. I don't know what you're talking about, she said unconvincingly. I placed Jessica's phone on the table, open to the messages. Yes, you do. Amanda's shoulders slumped. How did you find out? Does it matter? What matters is how long you've known about this and never said anything to me. She looked genuinely distressed. It's complicated, Nick. Jessica and Brad have history. They've been on and off for years, even while she's been with other guys. Other guys? The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. You mean I'm not the first? Amanda's expression shifted from discomfort to something like pity. You're not the first guy she's used. Used? She sighed deeply, then pulled out her own phone. Look, I've enabled her for too long because she's been my friend since forever, but this isn't right. She scrolled through her gallery and turned the screen toward me. This was taken last week when she told you she was at a marketing conference in Chicago. The photo showed Jessica and a man I assumed was Brad, laughing on a beach, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. They've been doing this for years, Amanda confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Finding successful men, getting engaged or married, then taking what they can during the split. It's their thing. I felt strangely calm as the final pieces fell into place. Their thing. Brad isn't just some ex-boyfriend she reconnected with, Amanda continued, unable to stop now that she'd started. He's her partner in all this. They work together. They always have. I stared at her, the full magnitude of the deception finally clear. How many others have there been? Amanda wouldn't meet my eyes. You're the fourth that I know of. I drove home from meeting Amanda in a state of eerie calm. The world around me looked the same, people walking dogs, couples holding hands, traffic lights changing, but everything had shifted. My entire relationship had been a calculated lie from the beginning. When I walked into our apartment, Jessica was waiting with a candlelit dinner and a bottle of my favorite wine. "I thought we could have a special evening," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "To reconnect." I smiled back, the muscles in my face stiff with the effort. "That sounds perfect." Over dinner, I watched her perform the role of devoted fiancée, laughing at my jokes, touching my arm, gazing adoringly. I wondered how I'd ever believed it was genuine. Now I could see the slight calculation behind each gesture, the momentary pauses as she decided which emotional response would be most effective. It was time to set my trap. "I got some incredible news today," I said, refilling our wine glasses. "That downtown revitalization project I mentioned? They've selected our firm and I'm leading the design team." Jessica's eyes widened with interest. "That's amazing, baby. Will it mean a promotion?" "Better," I said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "The fee for this project alone is 7 figures. And I get a substantial percentage as lead architect." I watched as something flickered in her eyes, a sudden sharpening of focus, like a predator spotting prey. "That's incredible," she breathed, reaching for my hand. "You deserve it. You've worked so hard." "There's more," I continued. "My Uncle Richard passed away last month." "The one in Seattle?" "I'm so sorry," she said, her expression appropriately somber, though I'd never mentioned any uncle in Seattle before. "He left me a significant inheritance. The lawyers called today. Apparently he had investments we never knew about. Property, stocks." I let my voice trail off as if overwhelmed by the unexpected windfall. Jessica was practically vibrating with excitement, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of supportive concern. "Wow, that's a lot to process. Are you okay? I know you were close to him." I nodded solemnly. "It's been a shock. The timing with everything else." I gestured vaguely between us. "Maybe it's a sign," she said, leaning closer. "A fresh start for us. New opportunities, new beginnings." She suggested we have another glass of wine in the bedroom, her intentions transparent. I made an excuse about an early meeting and watched disappointment flash across her face. The next morning, I told Jessica I had to fly to Boston for meetings about the new project. "I'll only be gone for the weekend," I said, packing an overnight bag. "Back Sunday night." "Can't I come with you?" she asked, pouting. "We could make it a romantic getaway. I could show you around my old college campus." "Not this time," I said. "It's all meetings and site visits. No time for fun." She hid her disappointment quickly. "Well, at least it'll give me time to start planning our wedding again. I was thinking, with everything going on, maybe we should move it up? Why wait 3 more months?" I raised an eyebrow. "Move it up? I thought you wanted time to plan your dream wedding." She wrapped her arms around my neck. "I just want to be your wife. We could do something small, intimate. We don't need a big production. Or a prenuptial agreement," I thought. "And," she added, kissing my neck, "we should really think about combining all our accounts. It's silly to keep things separate when we're building a life together." "We'll talk about it when I get back," I promised. Instead of going to the airport, I drove to a hotel downtown where I'd arranged to meet Thomas Reeves, a private investigator recommended by a colleague. He was ex-military, middle-aged, with observant eyes that missed nothing. "I need surveillance on my fiancée this weekend," I explained, showing him photos of Jessica and Brad. "I believe she'll be meeting this man." Thomas nodded. "Infidelity case. Pretty standard. Any known meeting spots?" "Try the Grand Hotel first. She thinks I'm out of town until Sunday night." He accepted the retainer without further questions. I spent the weekend in another hotel across town, jumping each time my phone buzzed with updates from Thomas. First, photos of Jessica entering the Grand Hotel on Friday night, dressed in a red dress I'd never seen. Then Brad arriving 30 minutes later. On Saturday evening, Thomas called me directly. "You might want to hear this," he said. I managed to get a table next to them at dinner and recorded their conversation. He played the audio file over the phone. Jessica's familiar laugh, followed by her voice. "You should have seen his face when I told him we should move up the wedding. So eager, so trusting." Brad's voice replied, "Did he mention the inheritance again? And the project? We're talking millions, Brad. And he has no idea about the prenup? He thinks we're doing the standard paperwork his lawyer mentioned." "But you replaced it?" Her laugh again, throatier this time. "Of course. He'll sign without reading closely. He always does." To Nick the Rube, Brad said, the clink of glasses audible. "A few more months, baby, and we'll be on a beach somewhere spending his money." I ended the call, my suspicions confirmed beyond any doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos, audio recordings, emails, bank statements, the divorce papers. On Sunday afternoon, I returned home just as Jessica was placing shopping bags by the door. More new clothes purchased with my credit card. "Nick?" She rushed to embrace me. "I've missed you so much. How was your trip?" "Educational," I said, hugging her back. "Very educational." "I have a surprise," she whispered against my ear. "I bought us tickets for that Mediterranean cruise you've always talked about. For our honeymoon." I smiled, knowing it was time for the final confrontation. "Actually, I have a surprise for you too," I said. "Dinner reservations tonight. Somewhere special." I made reservations at Ellison's, the most expensive restaurant in the city. The kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices and the wine list is thicker than a novel. Jessica's eyes lit up when I told her where we were going. "Ellison's? Really?" She kissed me eagerly. "What's the occasion?" "I thought we should celebrate new beginnings," I said, watching her interpret my words exactly as I expected. She emerged from our bedroom in a stunning black dress I'd never seen before, looking radiant and triumphant. I complimented her sincerely. Whatever else she was, Jessica had always been beautiful. In the car, she talked excitedly about wedding plans, honeymoon destinations, and the house we could now afford in the exclusive lakeside neighborhood. I nodded and smiled, letting her build her castle in the air one final time. The maitre d' led us to a private dining area in the back of the restaurant. Jessica looked impressed, her hand tightening around mine possessively. "The best table in the house," I said as we were seated. "I requested something special for tonight." We ordered cocktails and Jessica reached across the table to touch my hand. "I'm so happy we're working through this rough patch. I knew we were meant to be together." I smiled. "You sound very confident." "Because I know you," she said, her expression earnest. "And I know what we have is special." Our drinks arrived and I proposed a toast. "To the truth," I said, raising my glass. She hesitated for just a moment before clinking her glass against mine. "To us." "Before we order," I said, "I have something for you." Jessica's eyes brightened with anticipation as I reached into my jacket. Instead of the jewelry box she was clearly expecting, I pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked, her smile faltering. "Open it." Her perfectly manicured fingers flipped open the folder. Inside were printouts of her text messages with Brad, screenshots of emails, photos from her business trip, and bank statements showing her secret account. The color drained from her face. "Nick, I can explain. I know about you and Brad," I said quietly. "I know about your plan. I know about the other men you've done this to." Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. "This is just a misunderstanding." "Is it?" I turned to a specific page in the folder. "Here's an email where you talk about how to maximize what you can take from me in the divorce. And here," I flipped to another page, "is where Brad calls me the next sucker in line. Was I just another mark to you, Jessica? Was anything real?" She switched tactics, her eyes suddenly hard. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this information? Who's going to believe you over me?" Her confidence was jarring. "What do you mean?" Jessica leaned forward, her voice low and threatening. "It's your word against mine. I'm the devoted fiancé, you're the controlling, paranoid boyfriend. Who do you think people will side with?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Why don't we find out?" I gestured toward the tables around us. Jessica turned, finally noticing the other diners in our private section. At one table sat Amanda with a man I didn't recognize. At another, an older gentleman I'd never met stared intently at Jessica. Two more tables held couples who were watching our exchange with knowing expressions. "Who are these people?" Jessica whispered, her composure cracking. "This gentleman here is Robert Chin," I said, gesturing to the older man. "You were engaged to him 3 years ago in Seattle. And over there is Thomas Meyer from Chicago. Before him was David Kwan from San Francisco." Each man nodded grimly as I introduced them. Jessica's face shifted from confusion to horror as she realized she was surrounded by her previous victims. "I found them all," I continued. "It wasn't hard once I knew what to look for. Your pattern is consistent." "You had no right," she hissed. "And this," I said, nodding to a man at a corner table who had been quietly filming our conversation, "is Thomas Reeves, the private investigator who recorded you and Brad discussing your plans for my money last night at the Grand Hotel. You've been spying on me?" Her voice rose, drawing attention from the main dining room. "Gathering evidence," I corrected. "Which has been turned over to the authorities." It seems your schemes cross state lines, which makes them federal offenses. Jessica's facade finally shattered. She grabbed her wine glass and threw the contents in my face. You stupid, pathetic man, she spat. You think you're so clever? You've ruined everything. I calmly wiped the wine from my face with a napkin. No, Jessica. You did that yourself. She stood, grabbing her purse. This isn't over, she threatened, her voice shaking. Actually, it is, I said. Your table's waiting if you want to order dinner. I've already paid. Consider it a parting gift. Jessica looked around at the circle of faces. Her former fiancés, Amanda, the private investigator, all witnesses to her exposure. With a strangled sound of rage, she stormed out of the restaurant. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the past weeks lifting. The charade was over. The truth was out. For the first time since discovering Jessica's betrayal, I felt like I could breathe again. Amanda moved to my table, sitting across from me. That was intense. Are you okay? I considered the question for a moment. Not yet, I said honestly. But I will be. The week after the restaurant confrontation passed in a blur of practical matters. I officially called off the wedding, sent back gifts, and notified the venue. Each task felt like cutting another string that had bound me to Jessica's elaborate puppet show. My phone buzzed constantly with her messages, cycling between vicious attacks and desperate pleas. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. Please, we can work through this. I need you. You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do. I'm dying without you, Nick. Please answer. I blocked her number after the 40th message. It didn't stop her from creating new email addresses, sending letters, even leaving notes on my car. Each contact alternated between threatening me and begging for another chance. I needed to disappear for a while. Stay with me, Mike suggested over beers. We'd been friends since elementary school, but had drifted apart during my relationship with Jessica. I've got a spare room and my building has security. Mike had never hidden his dislike for Jessica, which had caused tension between us. Now his foresight seemed almost prophetic. There was always something off about her, he said, nursing his beer. Those eyes, like a shark's. Dead when she wasn't performing. I winced. I wish I'd seen it sooner. Love makes fools of us all, he shrugged. At least you caught her before the wedding. I moved into Mike's spare room the next day. It felt strange living out of suitcases at 32, like a college kid again rather than a successful architect. But it also felt necessary. The apartment Jessica and I had shared was poisoned with memories and lies. My boss granted me additional leave when I explained the situation. Take the time you need, he said. The downtown project will wait. I spent the first few days barely leaving Mike's apartment, sleeping more than I had in years, as if my body needed to recover from the constant state of tension I'd been living in. Slowly, I began reconstructing my life. I reached out to old friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Jessica. Many had sensed something was wrong but hadn't known how to tell me. She always found reasons for us not to meet up, my college friend Dave told me over the phone. After a while, I just stopped trying. I should have seen through it, I said. No one wants to believe the person they love is manipulating them, Dave replied. Listen, I'm having a small get-together this weekend. Nothing fancy, just a few friends from the old days. You should come. I hesitated. The thought of socializing still felt exhausting. Just for an hour, Dave pressed. If you hate it, you can leave. But you need to get out, man. Maybe he was right. I'd been hiding long enough. Dave's apartment hadn't changed since our post-college days. Mismatched furniture, walls covered in concert posters, and a collection of obscure vinyl records displayed proudly. The familiarity was comforting. I recognized most of the faces, old friends from architecture school, a couple of Dave's cousins, but one woman standing by the bookshelf was unfamiliar. She was studying Dave's collection of architecture books, a glass of wine in hand. Dave followed my gaze. That's Lauren. She works at Hartman and Associates. I think you two might hit it off. She's an architect too. I'm not really looking to hit it off with anyone right now, I said quickly. As friends, Dave clarified. She's smart, reads actual books, and doesn't have a dramatic bone in her body. The complete opposite of. I get it, I interrupted. Before I could protest further, Dave was leading me across the room for introductions. Lauren turned from the bookshelf with a genuine smile that reached her eyes, warm brown eyes that held none of the calculating sharpness I'd grown to recognize in Jessica's. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater, her dark hair cut in a practical shoulder-length style. Nick, this is Lauren Chin. Lauren, Nick Davidson. Nice to meet you, she said, her handshake firm. Dave mentioned you're with Bradbury Associates? I loved your work on the Riverside Community Center. I blinked in surprise. You're familiar with it? The suspended mezzanine with those curved sight lines? Is brilliant. I took my nephew there last month. He's 7 and obsessed with architecture. Possibly the only 7-year-old who can pronounce cantilever. I found myself laughing, the sound almost foreign to my ears after weeks of stress. We fell into easy conversation about our projects, favorite buildings, design philosophies. Not once did she try to impress me or perform in the way I'd grown accustomed to with Jessica. Hours passed without my noticing. The party continued around us, but we remained by the bookshelf, deeply engaged in conversation that flowed without effort or agenda. I should probably head out, Lauren said eventually, checking her watch. Early meeting tomorrow. Me too, I said, feeling disappointed. This was nice. It was, she agreed, her smile sincere. Maybe we could continue this sometime? As colleagues, she added quickly, as if sensing my hesitation. I'd love to hear more about that passive cooling system you mentioned. For the first time in months, I felt something uncomplicated and genuine, simple enjoyment of another person's company. I'd like that, I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. 2 weeks after meeting Lauren, life had settled into something resembling normalcy. We'd met for coffee twice, professional, friendly conversations that felt refreshingly uncomplicated. I'd found a new apartment across town and returned to work, throwing myself into the downtown revitalization project. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble came when my colleague Marcus approached my desk with an uncomfortable expression. Hey Nick, did you and Jessica have a bad fight or something? My stomach tightened. We broke up. Why? She called the office this morning. Told the receptionist you'd been emotionally abusive throughout your relationship. Said we should all know the truth about Nick Davidson. The blood drained from my face. That's completely false. I know, man. Nobody who knows you would believe that garbage. He hesitated. But she's been calling some of the clients too. By the end of the day, 3 more colleagues had reported similar calls. My boss called me into his office, his expression grave. Nick, I've known you for 8 years. I don't believe a word of what she's saying. But this is becoming a problem for the firm. I nodded, sick with the realization that Jessica was now targeting my professional reputation. I understand. I'll handle it. But how do you handle someone who's willing to burn everything down out of spite? That weekend, Jessica took her campaign digital. Fake social media accounts appeared overnight, posting manufactured evidence of my supposed cruelty and infidelity. Old photos were edited and shared out of context. Mutual acquaintances began to distance themselves, uncertain what to believe. She's desperate, Mike said when I showed him the posts. She's lost control of the narrative and she's lashing out. Desperate or not, she's damaging my reputation, I replied, scrolling through the latest batch of lies. Then Lauren called, her voice tight with concern. Nick, I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I've been getting strange messages. My blood ran cold. From Jessica? Yes. At first they came from fake accounts, warnings about you, claiming you're dangerous and manipulative. But this morning I got an email that appeared to be from you, saying some really disturbing things. It wasn't me, I said quickly. She's impersonating me. I know, Lauren assured me. The email had your name but used a Gmail account I know isn't yours. Plus, it didn't sound anything like you. I closed my eyes, fighting a wave of anger and helplessness. I'm so sorry you've been dragged into this. It's not your fault, she said firmly. But I thought you should know. After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my new apartment, feeling the walls closing in. Jessica was methodically attacking every aspect of my life. Professional, social, even potential new relationships. How far would she go? I got my answer the following evening when I returned home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I cautiously pushed it open. The destruction inside stole my breath. Someone had ransacked the entire place. Furniture overturned, clothes strewn everywhere, dishes smashed. On the living room wall, written in what looked like red lipstick, "You will regret this." I called the police immediately. The responding officers took photos, dusted for fingerprints and filed a report, but their expressions made it clear this was low priority for them. Unfortunately, without cameras in the hallway or witnesses, it's going to be difficult to prove who did this, the older officer explained. I know exactly who did it, I insisted. Do you have any evidence it was your ex-fiancée? He asked. I had none. Just the certainty that came from knowing exactly how vindictive Jessica could be. We'll issue a warning to her, the officer said, but my advice? Get some security cameras installed. Document everything. The next morning, I did exactly that, ordering a comprehensive security system with cameras covering every entrance. I spent the day cleaning up the wreckage of my apartment, jumping at every sound, checking the locks repeatedly. Later that evening, Mike came over to help me finish setting up the security system. You should consider a restraining order, he suggested as we mounted the final camera. I'm not sure it would do much good, I sighed. She's careful. The police can't prove she was the one who broke in. Maybe, but it creates an official record. When she does something else, there's a pattern established. I nodded, realizing he was right. I'll talk to a lawyer tomorrow. And what about Lauren? Mike asked. Have you told her about all this? I shook my head. We've only just met. The last thing she needs is to be caught in the crossfire of my disastrous personal life. I get that, but she's already involved. Jessica made sure of that. Mike gave me a pointed look. Wouldn't it be better if Lauren heard the full story from you rather than whatever twisted version Jessica is feeding her? He was right, but the thought of bringing someone new into this chaos made me feel guilty. Lauren was kind, intelligent, straightforward, everything Jessica wasn't. She deserved better than to be dragged into my nightmare. I'll think about it, I promised, though the distance I'd need to create felt like yet another thing Jessica had taken from me. The morning after the break-in, I met with a lawyer who specialized in harassment cases. She helped me file for a temporary restraining order against Jessica, though she was frank about its limitations. It's a piece of paper, she warned. It won't physically stop her, but it creates legal consequences if she violates it. As I was leaving her office, my phone rang. Thomas Reeves, the private investigator. Mr. Davidson, I have information you need to hear. Can we meet? An hour later, we sat in a quiet corner of a busy cafe. Thomas looked more serious than I remembered, sliding a thick folder across the table. When you hired me to follow Jessica and Brad, I thought it was a straightforward infidelity case. But something bothered me about their conversations, so I kept digging on my own time. He opened the folder, revealing documents I didn't recognize. Your ex-fiancée and her partner aren't just emotional manipulators. They're running sophisticated financial scams across multiple states. I stared at him. What kind of scams? Identity theft, wire fraud, investment schemes. Thomas pointed to several pages of financial records. They create shell companies, convince their marks to invest, then disappear with the money. They've operated under at least 6 different names that I've uncovered so far. The documents showed bank transfers, business registrations, and what appeared to be falsified investment returns. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because there are open investigations in Nevada, Arizona, and Washington. They don't know they're chasing the same people. He leaned forward. And because I found these in a public records search. He showed me mugshots of Jessica and Brad from 5 years earlier, different names, different hair colors, but unmistakably them. They were arrested in Oregon for fraud, but charges were dropped when the main witness suddenly refused to testify. My mind was reeling. So what you're saying is, your relationship wasn't just a path to divorce settlement money. It was cover for a larger operation. That evening, I called one of the former victims from the restaurant confrontation, Robert Chin. When I mentioned Thomas's findings, he wasn't surprised. After you contacted me, I hired my own investigator, he said. Jessica, or Melissa as I knew her, convinced me to invest in a revolutionary medical technology startup. Over $300,000 gone. Did you report it? Of course, but the company existed on paper. All the documentation looked legitimate. By the time authorities started investigating, they'd moved on to their next target. Robert connected me with 2 other men Jessica and Brad had scammed. We pooled our information, discovering a pattern spanning nearly a decade. We should take this to the FBI, said David Kwan, another victim. This crosses state lines, which makes it federal jurisdiction. I have a friend who's an assistant district attorney, Thomas Meyer offered. He can help navigate the system. Within days, our informal group had grown to 8 men, all victims of Jessica and Brad's schemes. We created a secure online forum to share information, building a comprehensive picture of their operation. One of the men, James Wilson, was a corporate attorney specializing in financial crimes. He offered to coordinate our case pro bono. This isn't just about revenge or justice for us individually, he explained during a video call. These people have hurt dozens of victims and they'll continue until they're stopped. Working together, we mapped out a timeline of Jessica and Brad's activities, identifying over 15 separate scams totaling millions of dollars. Their methods were consistent: identify successful, trusting targets, establish romantic relationships or business partnerships, gain access to finances, then disappear with as much money as possible. James advised us to organize our evidence methodically for the authorities. The more complete our documentation, the stronger the case. While sorting through old papers from my time with Jessica, I discovered a hidden compartment in a decorative box she'd left behind. Inside were several fake IDs with Jessica's photo but different names, blank business letterheads, and a small notebook with accounts and passwords. Most disturbing was a document bearing my company's letterhead with what appeared to be my signature authorizing a wire transfer of $50,000. It was a forgery but a convincing one. She'd been practicing my signature. I called my company's finance department immediately. Sure enough, they confirmed an unusual transfer had been processed 3 months earlier, supposedly authorized by me for a vendor deposit on our downtown project. Jessica hadn't just been planning to take my money through divorce. She'd already stolen from me and from my firm. I reported the fraud to my boss, who immediately launched an internal investigation. The evidence was clear. Jessica had used her access to my home office to steal company documents, forge my signature, and divert funds to an account we now knew was connected to one of Brad's shell companies. The final piece clicked into place when FBI agent Sarah Lindholm contacted me. My name had come up in an ongoing investigation. "We've been tracking a sophisticated fraud ring operating across the western states," she explained. "Your ex-fiancée and her partner have been on our radar for some time, but they're careful. We need witnesses willing to testify." I thought of the destruction Jessica had already caused in my life, the reputation she tried to ruin, the new relationship with Lauren she'd attempted to poison before it could begin. "I'll testify," I told Agent Lindholm. "And I can bring 7 other witnesses with me." The call came at 6 in the morning, jolting me from a fitful sleep. Agent Lindholm's voice was clipped, professional. "We've arrested Jessica Bennett and Bradley Pierce at San Diego International Airport. They were attempting to leave the country with false passports and approximately $300,000 in cash." A wave of relief washed over me. Were they resisting? No resistance, but they had tickets to a non-extradition country and multiple sets of identification. They were definitely fleeing. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, overcome by conflicting emotions: relief, vindication, and a strange emptiness. For weeks, my life had revolved around gathering evidence and building a case. Now that Jessica and Brad were in custody, I wasn't sure what came next. The news broke nationally the following day. "Romantic con artists arrested in multi-state fraud scheme," ran across headlines. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, even distant acquaintances who had seen the story. Those who had doubted me or believed Jessica's lies reached out with apologies. Others who had distanced themselves returned, offering support now that my version of events had been publicly validated. Lauren called too. "I just saw the news. Are you okay?" "Better than I've been in a while," I admitted. "Though it's strange seeing our relationship dissected in national media." "I can imagine," she said. "If you need someone to talk to who isn't going to ask invasive questions about it all, I'm here." Her offer of friendship without agenda meant more than she could know. The pretrial process moved faster than I expected. With victims in multiple states, federal prosecutors built a comprehensive case against Jessica and Brad. Our evidence, financial records, forged documents, recorded conversations, created a damning picture of their years-long criminal enterprise. 6 weeks after their arrest, I sat in a federal courtroom for the preliminary hearing. Jessica and Brad were brought in separately, both in orange jumpsuits, a stark contrast to the polished, confident personas they'd cultivated. Jessica's eyes found mine across the courtroom. For a brief moment, her mask slipped, revealing pure hatred before she composed herself into a picture of demure vulnerability for the judge. The prosecution outlined the charges: wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The list seemed endless. Bail was denied due to flight risk. As the case progressed, more victims came forward. What had started with 8 of us grew to over 20 men and women who had been romantically manipulated, financially defrauded, or both. Jessica and Brad's defense strategy became clear during pretrial motions: blame each other. Their lawyers argued that each had been manipulated by the other, each a victim rather than a perpetrator. Classic narcissist playbook, the prosecutor explained after one particularly contentious hearing. They're turning on each other now that they can't maintain the united front. Jessica's attorney portrayed her as a battered woman under Brad's control. Brad's lawyer claimed he suffered from a personality disorder that made him susceptible to Jessica's influence. Each pointed to the other as the mastermind. The judge saw through their tactics. Evidence showed they were equal partners, meticulously planning each scheme together, sharing the proceeds equally. Throughout the proceedings, I was struck by how neither showed genuine remorse. Their performances were calculated for maximum sympathy from the jury, Brad appearing contrite and broken, Jessica tearful and fragile. It was the same manipulation they'd used on their victims, now deployed in their own defense. When my turn came to testify, I felt Jessica's eyes boring into me from the defendant's table. I focused instead on telling the truth plainly, describing how she had integrated herself into my life, planned to marry me for financial gain and stolen from my company. On cross-examination, Jessica's attorney tried to paint me as controlling and paranoid. "Isn't it true that you invaded Ms. Bennett's privacy by looking through her phone?" "Yes," I answered honestly. After seeing a message from a man she claimed to have no contact with, using an endearment and heart emoji. "So you admit to spying on her?" "I admit to finding evidence of her deception when it presented itself, yes." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Friends and colleagues testified to Jessica's manipulation of my reputation after our breakup. Financial experts traced the money through their network of shell companies. Former victims shared strikingly similar stories of deception. When the verdict came, it was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. At sentencing, Jessica finally dropped the Wounded Victim Act. When given the opportunity to speak, she stood defiant. "These men got what they deserved," she declared. "Vain, gullible men who thought they deserved a woman like me." The judge was unmoved. "Ms. Bennett, your lack of remorse speaks volumes. The calculated nature of your crimes, the number of victims whose lives you've damaged, and your continued attempts to manipulate this court leave me no choice." Jessica received 15 years in federal prison. Brad, who had at least shown some contrition, received 12 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution to their victims. As Jessica was led away in handcuffs, she turned to glare at me one final time. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not anger, just a profound sense that a chapter of my life was finally closing. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for interviews. I declined them all, wanting no part in extending the public spectacle. This had never been about revenge or publicity. It was about justice, and now it was done. 1 year after Jessica's sentencing, I stood on the rooftop terrace of our firm's new downtown office, surveying the city beneath a perfect spring sky. The revitalization project had been a remarkable success, transforming an abandoned industrial zone into a vibrant mixed-use district with our architecture firm at its heart. "There's the man of the hour," my boss called, raising his glass. "The genius behind Riverside Commons." I smiled, accepting the praise with a nod. The promotion I'd received, the one Jessica had planned to capitalize on, had given me the chance to lead this project, the most ambitious of my career. The irony wasn't lost on me. As colleagues and clients mingled at our opening reception, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. The months following the trial had been a period of rebuilding, not just my professional reputation but my ability to trust again. The unexpected outcome of Jessica's crimes was the creation of the Financial Fraud Survivors Network, a nonprofit I'd founded with the other victims. What began as a support group had evolved into an organization providing legal advice and counseling to people who had experienced similar betrayals. The pain we'd endured had become purpose, helping others navigate the aftermath of deception. "Your speech was excellent," came a familiar voice. Lauren stood beside me, elegant in a simple blue dress. "Especially the part about architecture creating spaces for authentic community." "Thanks." I meant every word. Our relationship had developed slowly, naturally, without the artificial acceleration Jessica had always pushed for. We'd started as friends, meeting for coffee to discuss projects, gradually spending more time together as my life stabilized. Neither of us had been in a rush. "Have you checked your email?" Lauren asked, her expression suspiciously neutral. The Harrison Museum proposal responses were supposed to come in today. The Harrison Museum renovation was a prestigious project we'd collaborated on, submitting a joint proposal from our respective firms. It would be career-defining if we won it. "I've been avoiding my phone during the reception," I admitted. Lauren's professional composure cracked, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "Well, Mr. Davidson, you might want to take a look." I pulled out my phone, scrolling to find an email from the Harrison Foundation board. The subject line read, "Proposal Acceptance." We'd won. "You knew already?" I laughed, feeling a surge of joy. "They called me an hour ago," she confessed. I wanted you to read it yourself. I hugged her, both of us giddy with professional triumph. This collaboration, equal, respectful, mutually beneficial, represented everything my relationship with Jessica had not been. Later that evening, we walked along the river that bordered our development project, the new promenade lit by artful installations that reflected on the water. It's hard to believe where I was a year ago, I said as we paused to watch the sunset. I thought my life was over, my reputation, my career, my ability to trust anyone. Lauren squeezed my hand. Trauma like that changes you. But not always for the worse. She was right. The experience had taught me to recognize authenticity, to value substance over performance, to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. I got a letter from Jessica last week, I said, something I hadn't told anyone else. From prison. Lauren looked at me, concern in her eyes. What did it say? She wanted forgiveness. Said she's changed, found religion, realized the harm she caused. I shrugged. The usual prison conversion story. Do you believe her? I considered the question. No. But I also don't care anymore. That chapter's closed. We continued walking, stopping at a small cafe where we'd had our first unofficial date. The owner recognized us, waving us to our table on the patio. I have something for you, I said, feeling suddenly nervous. For your birthday. Lauren raised an eyebrow. My birthday isn't for 2 weeks. I know, but this felt like the right moment. I handed her a small wrapped package. She opened it carefully, revealing 2 plane tickets to Barcelona, her favorite city, one she'd often talked about visiting again. Nick, this is too much. It's for both of us, I explained. I thought after the museum project is underway we could take some time off. See Gaudi's work together instead of just talking about it. Lauren's eyes sparkled. I'd love that. As the evening light faded, I reached across the table for her hand. There's something else I wanted to ask you. Her expression softened, anticipating my question. I want to spend my life with you, I said quietly. Not because I'm afraid of being alone or because it looks good on paper, but because with you I become a better version of myself. I slid a small box across the table. No grand gesture, no public spectacle. Just an honest question between 2 people who had grown to love each other. Will you marry me, Lauren? Her smile was the most genuine thing I'd ever seen. Yes, she whispered. Absolutely yes. As we planned a small ceremony with only our closest friends, I sometimes thought about how differently things had turned out from what I'd once imagined. Jessica had entered my life like a thunderstorm, dramatic, overwhelming, ultimately destructive. Lauren had arrived like daybreak, gradual, warm, illuminating. What are you thinking about? Mike asked at our engagement dinner, seeing my momentary reflection. Just that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best places, I replied, watching Lauren laugh with our friends across the room. I had to lose my way to find where I was supposed to be.